Hollywood loves a good medieval dungeon. You know the scene: dripping walls, skeletons in chains, and a collection of spiky, terrifying metal contraptions that look like they were designed by a heavy metal band. The reality, as is often the case, was both less cinematic and somehow more unsettling. The purpose of torture wasn't just random cruelty, it was a state-sanctioned, legally regulated part of the judicial process. It had rules, it had paperwork. Imagine a bureaucrat with a clipboard sighing because the accused didn't dislocate their shoulders in the regulation-approved manner. That's the world we're stepping into. This wasn't chaos, it was a system. A terribly designed system run by people convinced of their own righteousness, which is always the most dangerous combination. Before the modern concept of innocent until proven guilty, many European legal systems operated on a different principle. To secure a conviction for a serious crime, you needed either 2 eyewitnesses or a full confession. Since criminals weren't usually thoughtful enough to commit their crimes in front of 2 reliable, upstanding citizens, that left confession. The confession was called the queen of proofs. And if the accused was stubbornly refusing to provide this queen, well, the state had methods of persuasion. Judicial torture wasn't about punishment. It was an interrogation tool, a grotesque key designed to unlock a confession, whether it was true or not. Mostly not. The logic was profoundly circular. If you were suspected enough to be tortured, you were probably guilty anyway, so a confession was just a formality. Let's start with a classic that was actually used. Forget the Iron Maiden for a second and consider the strapado, or as it was sometimes called, the corda. Its genius was in its simplicity. All you needed was a rope, a pulley, and a high ceiling. The victim's hands were tied behind their back, and the rope was slung over the pulley and attached to their wrists. Then they were hoisted into the air. The full weight of their body would hang from their arms, twisted backwards. Shoulders would dislocate. It was efficient, it was cheap, and it was meticulously documented. We have records of how long people were suspended, whether weights were added to their feet for extra persuasion, and how many jerks or drops they were subjected to. Bureaucracy at its finest. The best part is that this wasn't just some free-for-all. Oh no, there were levels. The first degree might just be showing the person the device. A little psychological nudge. The next degree was hoisting them up, but letting their toes just touch the ground. A taste of what's to come. Then came the full suspension. And for the particularly stubborn, there was the squassation, where they'd be hoisted up and then dropped suddenly, the rope catching them before they hit the ground. The resulting jolt would compound the dislocations with fractures. All of this was overseen by a magistrate and a doctor to ensure the torture didn't go too far and, kill the suspect before they could sign the confession. Priorities. Now for the one everyone's heard of, the rack. Unlike the strapado, which was basically just rope, the rack was a proper piece of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity in the service of human misery. It was a simple wooden frame with rollers at each end. The victim's ankles were fastened to one end and their wrists to the other. A torturer would then use a lever or a wheel to slowly, methodically turn the rollers. This pulled the victim's body in opposite directions. You can imagine the rest. Popping sounds from cartilage, ligaments tearing, joints being pulled from their sockets. It was designed to inflict maximum pain without being immediately lethal. The sweet spot for a good interrogation. The rack was famously effective at getting people to talk, or at least to make sounds, and eventually to sign things. A famous example is Guy Fawkes of the 1605 gunpowder plot. We have two versions of his signature on his confession. The first, before torture, is a clear, confident Guido Fawkes. The second, after he was introduced to the rack in the Tower of London, is a barely legible shaky scrawl. It looks like the signature of a man whose arms no longer function properly. King James I himself had authorized his torture, by the gentler tortures first, of course, because a gentle stretching until your limbs separate is so much more civilized. The resulting confession implicated his co-conspirators, which was the whole point. It didn't matter if it was true, it mattered that it closed the case. Not all torture needed a dedicated room and heavy equipment. For the discerning magistrate on the go, there were smaller, more portable options. Enter the thumbscrew, a beautifully simple device. Two metal bars, often with bumps or spikes on the inside, connected by a screw. You place the victim's thumb, or big toe, they weren't pickian, between, and start turning. It would slowly crush the digit, flattening the bone into a pulp. This was considered a minor form of torture, a sort of opening act before the headliners like the rack. What's truly chilling is the craftsmanship you see in some surviving examples. They're ornate, almost decorative, as if someone took real pride in designing the perfect little instrument for shattering a knuckle. Moving on from hands to feet, we have the Spanish boot, or leg screw. There were several variations on this charming theme. One popular model involved two wooden plates with spikes on the inside, placed on either side of the calf and shin. Wedges were then hammered between the plates, driving the spikes into the leg and crushing the tibia. It was a favorite during the Spanish Inquisition, though plenty of secular courts used it too. The goal, again, was agonizing, non-lethal pain. You could get a confession without having to clean up a huge mess afterwards. It was practical. The records often noted the number of wedges used, a cold, numerical accounting of a person's breaking point. So what about the most famous device of all, the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg? That iconic, human-shaped sarcophagus lined with spikes, the one you see in every bad horror movie set in the past. Here's the thing, it almost certainly never existed in the Middle Ages. The famous Nuremberg Maiden was built in the late 18th or early 19th century as a tourist attraction. It was a macabre fantasy created for a public that wanted to believe the medieval period was as barbaric as possible. It combined the idea of a sarcophagus with the Roman story of a spiked barrel. The past is always a great place to project your anxieties, and for the supposedly enlightened 19th century, nothing felt more sophisticated than imagining their ancestors as primitive brutes who put people in spiky boxes. Another popular candidate for thing that never was is the pear of anguish. This was a pear-shaped metal device that supposedly could be inserted into various orifices, and then expanded by turning a key, causing catastrophic internal damage. It's a terrifying concept. It's also probably nonsense. Most historians now believe these were likely shoe stretchers, glove expanders, or maybe even gag devices for which the more lurid use was invented later. There are no known medieval records of them being used for torture, but just like the Iron Maiden, they're too gruesomely fascinating to die. It tells you a lot about people that we'd rather believe in an impossibly cruel, mechanically complex torture device than a boring old shoe stretcher. The mundane is never scary enough. The real everyday horror of judicial torture wasn't about elaborate machines. It was about leveraging the body's own needs against it. Water torture, for example. Not a new idea, but ruthlessly effective. The victim would be tied down, often with a cloth placed over their mouth, and water would be poured over it. This simulated the sensation of drowning. It required no complex machinery, just a bucket, a cloth, and a complete lack of empathy. It leaves few marks, but inflicts immense psychological and physical distress. Sound familiar? Humans have been independently discovering this one for centuries, a testament to our enduring creativity in being awful to one another. Alongside water, there was sleep deprivation, forcing someone to stay awake for days on end, constantly prodded and questioned until their mind breaks from exhaustion. Again, no equipment necessary. This is the truly disturbing part. The most common and effective forms of torture were the most mundane. They weren't born from some diabolical inventor's fever dream. They were systematic procedures carried out by ordinary people in official buildings. Torturers weren't necessarily sadists, they were civil servants. They clocked in, they inflicted regulated amounts of agony, they filled out their paperwork, and they went home. The true horror isn't the spiky chair, it's the meticulous record-keeping. It's the normalization of brutality, turning it into just another part of the job. So why did this all stop? Was there a sudden wave of compassion that washed over Europe during the Enlightenment? Not really. It ended because influential thinkers like the Italian jurist Cesare Beccaria in his 1764 book On Crimes and Punishments started pointing out that it was, to put it mildly, an incredibly stupid way to find the truth. A person in agony will say anything to make the pain stop. They'll confess to killing the king, to witchcraft, to hiding Bigfoot. The confession, the queen of proofs, was worthless. The system wasn't abandoned because it was cruel, it was abandoned because it was ineffective. And that's the final, most cynical truth. We didn't stop because we got better, we just got more pragmatic about our injustice. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!